it means that
There
the
we go.
amount of distance
And
covered
this one's making noise for
each
some
frame
reason.
of this animation is the same.
Okay. Um, okay, so we're in week 6. How's your weekend?
Good.
Remember anything fun?
I did my first session of D&D.
Your first session of D&D.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was 6.5 hours long because none of us knew what we were
That's
doing. None of us knew what we were doing.
6.5 hours. Oh.
It took us like 2 hours to get our session started, so it started at like 9 p.m. So that was a great idea.
The first session,
My
one of our
session
members
was
was
2 hours 'cause they're
like
online.
sick, and we had like technically 2 DMs. The second one was to just do voices, and she was like, "I'm dying right now. I don't want to be here."
So we are we're gonna start easing back into Maya a little bit more. We had the graph editor error, not the graph editor error, the maze arrow last week. What all did you think of that? Anything you fight with on that? Did you-
Yeah, something happened with one of my friends that was stopping my video from Premiere reading it.
Oh really?
Yeah, so I went on the computer at my dorm and I only deleted like a snippet of it and then it started playing through it.
Yeah, sometimes like
Oh,
renders.
that's right, 'cause I emailed you.
Huh?
I emailed you, I forgot that I already mentioned that.
Did I get those?
It was like 12 a.m. You replied.
Okay, if I replied, then that's good.
But no, we didn't reply.
I get like hundreds of emails a day. I reply as fast as I can. So. Anything else y'all struggle with? So with that, you're probably getting a corrupted image, and if you just delete it and re-render that image, sometimes that'll fix. Yeah, let's see this stuff y'all do it.
Freaking render.
Rendering? Yeah, it's a pain in the butt.
It was a
Is it still that black render for you?
yeah, it do that sequence.
Yeah.
Sequence render.
Yeah. Other things y'all ran into? Huh? So that's why we didn't just dive right back in. I want to give you a little bit of time to kind of fight with this. This week, for those of you who have looked ahead, we're going to be doing another small animation exercise, but we're not going to be it's a little bit of work, but it's not a full project, right? Because I want to talk a little bit more about how to control your animation, how to have more control of your animation. So what I would say is this week we're going to be doing a bouncing ball. You can read that in the discussion. The bouncing ball exercise. I don't have an example on here, but basically it's your ball bouncing a minimum of 2. Let's see here. I have it listed in here somewhere. Yeah. The ball must bounce a minimum of 3 times, and it must have forward motion, roll, and squash and stretch, right? And so you'll be getting the bouncing ball rig. You can download it there. You can also download it under content, I think it is, right here, the ball rig. And a lot of what I'm going to be going over today is in our lessons. I'm going to go over some of this stuff in the graph editor, right? Probably going to go over most of everything up to the video number 5. And then I did animate a bouncing ball in here for you and watch you all fall asleep one at a time. Because watching somebody animate is kind of boring, right? It's really not super exciting. My wife always tells people how boring my job is. And she's like, he just stares at a bunch of curves all day long and like moves them a little bit. And I'm like, yeah, it's not really what I'm doing. But all right. So I'll be recording what I'm going over today, but pretty much everything I'm going to go over today is in these first few videos. I would encourage you to go back and watch it because I was probably much more succinct and detailed in those. But I'm not really going to go over the process of animating the bouncing ball because pretty much the thing you're going to be posting under discussion, video 6, 7, 8, and 9, is just me walking through that, right? Like me going through that, and you can watch through those at your own time on your own time. Today is a little bit more of like understanding why and how we're going to use this tool, the graph editor, right? How many of you messed around with the graph editor in either the Bridge project or the Arrow? Anybody? Okay. Thoughts?
Almost broke it. Not a fan.
Almost broke it. Huh?
Not a fan.
Not a fan. Anybody like it? A couple people who like it. Had you all used some form of graph editor before?
Yes.
Yeah, that's why you like it. Any other thoughts about it? Like, is it confusing? Like, I know it can be very daunting when you first open up the graph editor because it looks like this, and you're like, what does that mean? Right? Like, I don't understand what this tangled mess of colored lines mean. Okay.
I remember when I was creating one of my first walk cycles with the little. You've seen that ball with just legs, right?
Mhm.
Well, I was using that, and I was like, I think that needs to be smoother. And so I remember talking to somebody about it, and they were like, use the graph editor. So I used it. I remember just turning one portion of one of the leg portions for the graph editor, just a little bit, and it went from a normal, like maybe a little bit rocky walk cycle to just him swinging his leg up, and I was just like, well, that's not supposed to happen. And he broke his leg. That was my first experience.
So we're going to talk about. I think we're going to ease in kind of gently here with graphs because you are all familiar with graphs already. Really, what gets complicated for people is they see this and they're like, "How am I supposed to interpret that? Like, what does that even mean?" Right? So eventually, it will make sense to you. In fact, like looking at that, I have a good idea of what's happening, right? Just by glancing at that. That comes with experience, but we have to kind of push through that difficult part. Now, the graph editor is why it probably, like I would say, one of the number one reasons, there's probably two reasons that people switch from the animation concentration. Right? One is, I thought this was going to be easy. I want something a little less difficult. And that's fine, actually. Like if it's not something you're enjoying, turns out I'm really enjoying video games or I'm really enjoying English or whatever, that's cool, right? Like some people, it's like, it just wasn't what I expected. Probably the second most common one is, I hate the graph editor, right? Like I know professional modelers who told me that they switched from animation to modeling because they hated the graph editor. I'm going to try to get you past that. Here's the thing I will say. You're not going to like the graph editor the first time you try to mess with it. Like, just go ahead and accept that. You're going to be like, this is so annoying. Or you'll move something and the leg will flip out. You're like, why did it do that? Eventually, it becomes a tool that is like probably one of the most important tools an animator has. Right? So let's just talk about graphs. Let's forget about Maya. Let's just talk about graphs, period. Because I know how much you love them. Here's a whole bunch of data. Yeah. So, what can you infer from looking at this data? Any conclusions you can come to? You know, like,
United States is number 2.
United States is. So what this actually is the unemployment rate from 1991 to I think 2016.
We're number 2.
We're number 2. Yay! So this is actually a percentage, right? Or like the rate of the percentage of people who are in the employment pool, which just means people who are actively looking for a job, right? Some people are like, I'm not going to work right now. I'm going to focus on something else, right? But the people who are looking for a job, the number of them who can't find it, right? Or the percentage of them who can't find it. So in 1991, in the United States, 6.8%. Yeah, you're already asleep, right? Like I get you, right? And the thing about that is there's a lot of important information in here. If you're trying to prove things or show examples of stuff, there's a lot of important information in here, but looking at this table full of numbers does absolutely nothing to help you understand the unemployment rate over time, right? So we could graph these numbers out. Let's just focus on the United States, and let's graph out a few of these numbers, right? If I look at this graph for that, Now it starts to make a little more sense, right? I just graphed out 3 points. I graphed out, I don't know where I can see that on here. Let me zoom out just a little bit. I graphed out 1991, 2001, and 2016, right? And keep in mind what this is the percentage of people who can't find a job, who are looking for one. And so this is actually a good graph, right? Why is this good? Yeah, that number's getting lower, right? So down isn't bad and up isn't good. This is just something that represents whatever that number is. And if what we want is more people to be able to find a job, if unemployment is going down, that's good, right? And you could show this and be like, look, I graphed out all of that data, and over the last, what is that? Is that 25 years about? Over the last 25 years, the unemployment rate has steadily decreased. Has it? Well, all I graphed out was 3 points, right? I graphed out 3 different years. And we can see a steady decline. It looks like everything's getting better, right? But that's just because I only have 3 sample points, right? So what if I had a few more, right? Well, if I added 2 more, looks like I added 2011 or 12, something like that. 1996. Now we see this weird spike right in the middle there, where it looks like unemployment went up really high. Right? So we can understand that data a little more clearly. We can understand that change over time more clearly because we have more data points to graph that out, right? What's up with that spike?
Is that what happened with the housing thing in the early 2000s?
Yeah. So let's kind of refine that a little bit more. Like if we mapped out a graph of all of the different dates, right? We realize that this is actually year by year what happened, right? And what happened was that was the subprime lending crisis, whatever. I'm not an economist. A lot of people lost a lot of money and their jobs. And you can see this spike of unemployment there over just a few years, right? And we went into a recession, right? But then progressively over time, as we started going back toward 2016, it got better, and unemployment eventually got to a pretty low point. It wasn't an all-time low in this graph, but it was pretty low, right? So this is easier to understand than that line of numbers, right? We can look at this and we can understand what these values mean. And I think it's interesting that all of you, I think, can probably understand this graph because you understand 2 elements of this graph, right? And that's that the up and down axis means what?
Why? Right?
Well, yeah, but what is up and down representing in this? If the curve is higher, what does that mean?
It's the value.
The value is representing. Yeah, so the value of unemployment, or the percentage of unemployment, right? And so up here, when it was really bad, or there was a lot of unemployment, that curve is really high, and we go, ooh, that's bad, right? Really, really high is bad, because that means more people were unemployed. So what does side to side mean? If up and down is that number from unemployment, the percentage, what does the side to side axis mean? It's time, right? Just like time marches on in that direction, right? As it goes this way, like it's getting later and later in the year, right? Or in the decade, right? And so we understand those 2 axes, right? Up and down is the value, side to side is time, right? And once you kind of understand that, you can get a bigger picture of what's going on with that number, that unemployment number, than you could have by ever looking at this crazy like grid of data, right? So that's all the points. Now here's an interesting thing. Like now that we kind of understand that, if I just went ahead and layered a couple of more axes on there, what I've layered in here is Canada and China, right? And so just because we know side to side is time, up and down is the value, we can start seeing how these 3 axes or how these 3 values compare to each other, right? We can see that if the U.S. is in blue and Canada is in red, and China is in yellow. Well, it feels like China was a little more stable throughout that whole thing, right? Canada apparently had really high, but it dropped in the 90s, 2000s, right? And we can just get all of that information just by glancing at these three otherwise meaningless curves, right? They just need a context. What is the point of these curves? Now, the problem with the graph editor that you're having is when you open it, it looks like this, right? And you're like, that means nothing to me. Like, what is that big jaggy blue line? What happened in that country, right? Like,
It looks like when you're making like friendship bracelets and you get all of the string out of the.
it's all over the place, right? And if we want to dig around in there, we're like, wait, I think that's the U.S., right? But this is not helpful for us. Like, this is hard for us to understand, and that's why people struggle with the graph editor. Is they'll set a whole bunch of keyframes on stuff, and then they open up the graph editor and they see this, and they're like, I give up. I'm going to switch to game design, right? Like, I'm going to help like demystify some of that, and even more importantly, I'm going to help you think about these backwards, right? I want you to look at this curve and say that curve just represents somewhere a table full of numbers, right? I never have to look at that table full of numbers. I can just adjust elements of this curve in order to get transitions in my animations better, right? All right. So, now to Maya. Boo. You mean open Premiere?
Sorry, I didn't mean that.
Should I open Premiere?
Something else.
Something else.
No, I'm joking.
No, you're fine. I like it. So I'm going to go ahead and just change some stuff around here. When I made the videos, I had all these files. Don't have them anymore, so I'm going to make them kind of quickly. You're welcome to make these along with me and try it out yourself, or you can just watch to see the results, because I'm going to be asking questions. So I'm going to make a couple of these boxes. And one more. And I'm going to look at this from the top view. Control D to duplicate that, move it up to here. And I'm just going to set a couple of keyframes really quick on all three of these. So S, S, and then move those up to there. So don't sweat too much about what I'm doing here, but then I'm going to copy all of those and just sort of paste those along through here. So I get a few recurring cycles of this. So yeah, let's just trim that down to 95, 90, whatever. 96 apparently. Okay. Okay, so if I hit play on this, look at that. Why is it going that fast again?
The playback speed.
Playback speed.
Not
So
real time.
right click, playback speed, real time. And you can see that I'm actually a better animator than in the first scene. So we got these three boxes that are just sort of moving back and forth, oscillating between these two platforms. Right? So there's a couple of different ways you can open the graph editor. Anybody remember one of them?
Windows.
Yeah. So we can go when we hit stop, hit Windows, Animation Editor, Graph Editor. Right? And that's going to open up a graph editor as a separate window. This is what I usually use when I'm working personally, because what I could do is I could put this over here on another window, and I can edit it over there, and I still have full screen capabilities over here, right? But what I want to do just for display here is I'm also going to switch, instead of doing that, I'm going to switch to the animation workspace up here in this drop-down menu in the top. And what that's going to do is it's just going to put my graph editor below my top view here, right? So if I hit play, you can probably see what's happening just from those curves now. Like if you don't worry about the numbers, if you don't worry about any of that, you just look at this, you can see that those things are moving up and down, and this one curve is sort of waving up and down too, right? So here's where the graph editor is, where it always confuses people, is figuring out those two axes. What am I looking at? What does that represent, right? Well, I can clear one of them up for you really easily. Side to side is what? Left. Time. Marches on X. It's always side to side in this graph is always time. If we're looking at it, if I'm further to the right, that's later. Right? If I'm further to the left, that's earlier. Right? So this is just like any playback toggle you will see on YouTube or anything. That's never going to change on any curve you ever open up. Side to side is always time, right? So what is up and down then? Let's pick a curve. So one of the things that really confuses people, if I grab this box right here, right, you'll see that I get all sorts of curves just for that one box, right? So I have visibility, and if I click on that, it will isolate just visibility. And you can see that that line is perfectly straight, right? Translate X, perfectly straight. Translate Y, perfectly straight. Translate Z. Well, there's something interesting, right? Translate Z is doing something. So all these others, actually, you're going to see are not doing anything. So in this case, what does Translate Z, like, what is this curve showing us? Yeah, maybe I phrased that question kind of wrong. Let me kind of explain this. Huh? So yeah, that's an interesting question. Like, and that's where everybody gets confused. What is this curve talking about, right? What are we even looking at here? Well, again, side to side is always time. So up and down on Translate Z is just that value up there in your Translate Z channel. See where it's negative 2.694, right? Well, that means that right there on that curve is that value, negative 2.694. You'll see that as I slide in my graph editor here, that number changes up here in my Translate Z. So watch that number change. Right? So right there it's at 0, and as I travel forward to my next keyframe, you see that that number gets lower and lower and lower and lower until we get to negative 6.46, right? So that curve, the up and down axis is 0 to, say that, 6.46. Right there's lining up with it on that graph. So what is Translate Z? Yeah. It's the placement on the location on the z-axis for that object, right? So if I move my object in this perspective up and down, I'm changing my Translate Z. Now it's not changing my curve because I'm not setting a keyframe on it, right? If I snap back, it goes to that. But if I had auto key on, watch what happens. If I move this down a little bit, that curve changes. Right? It's automatically updating that keyframe. I can do it the other way too. If I wanted to highlight this keyframe, so the way I do that, I don't try to select it, I drag select it. So I click outside of it, drag, so I highlight just that keyframe, and then I release, and that selects that keyframe. And then you can just regular click and move it, but sometimes if you miss, you accidentally do that instead. If I just want to move that keyframe, I'm just going to middle click and I can move it that way. And that gives me a little bit more control, right? So if I move that value, let's use this one, well, yeah. If I move that value down, this is a little confusing, right? If I move that value down, I'm going to hold shift while I middle click and drag. And that'll keep it locked in one axis. If I move it down, my box goes up. right? But that's because I'm changing. Well, that's just because the way this works. I'm actually in the wrong. Flipped it upside down, right? So this number is going lower, and by going lower, we're going into the negative axis, right? So if I move that down, the box goes up. If I move it up, the box goes down, right? And so that's really where people start struggling with the graph editor is you have to look at this curve and say, how do I interpret these changes and what they meant to the way this object is going to move, right? Now, it's important to recognize that this translate z that we're adjusting is just the up and down direction of this box, right? There is nothing I can do to this curve ever to make my box move sideways, right? Because that's a different axis. Which axis is that? Yeah, it's translate x. How can you tell? So you can tell because it's got that red arrow is side to side, right? X, Y, Z, RGB. So X is red, right? And so we can see right here that if I wanted this to move from side to side, I could go to my translate X and adjust that curve, right? I could do something like this. And so now my animation, box travels at an angle there, and then back normal, okay? So, to get my object to move in 3D space, it requires 3 different curves, the X, the Y, and the Z. And then we also have rotation, right? If I wanted my box to rotate, there's a rotation of X, Y, and Z as well, okay? Is that making sense?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll come back to that part a little bit in a minute. Let's try this. So we've already talked about this. If I didn't want that to hit there, right? Let's try this. I want to make a new box really quick. And let's say I wanted it to look like my box was bouncing off of that instead, right? A little wider so you can see it, right? Instead of going through it, I wanted it to look like it's hitting and bouncing away. I could just go here and grab this on my Translate Z and realize that that shouldn't be my keyframe anymore. I could grab all of these. So I just drag selected to select them all. Hold down Shift and then middle click to raise that up. Sorry. So you have to be in the Move tool for this to work. So W. You can also scale keys, but I'm going to go ahead and hit W. So if I'm in the Move tool, and I raise all of those up to there, well, now my animation on that one's different. All right. So, is that making sense? What we're doing here? Yes.
Yes. But so far we can do that just in regular view. So.
You can. So you're right. So why go into the graph editor, right? So far you can do that just regularly without having to change it, right? Oh, it's like I planted you to like set me up for that, right? So there is a problem with this. Like, let's say I wanted it to feel like it was slamming against that box, right? So right now, I could have done this without having to go into the graph editor just by changing every one of those keyframes, pulling it down a little bit, right? And just setting a new keyframe for that up point. So one of the cool things about this is I can edit stuff kind of quickly. Like if I wanted the entire animation to be a little bit more to screen left, right? I could go to my Translate X, grab this entire curve, hold Shift, and sort of slide it that way. Right? And now that entire animation's over there, right? So there's some quick editing things there that's really helpful for. But really, the benefit of the graph editor is refinement. Right? This animation is moving, but it's not moving in the way that I want it to. Right? If I want it to look like it's slamming against that top piece, it doesn't feel like that. It feels like it's slowing down right before it gets to it. Right? And we can kind of watch that happen as we're approaching it, right? So we're starting here, and like watch the distance that this box travels from frame to frame. So from frame 1 to 2, travels a very small distance, right? But in the middle of this, let's say right about here, from frames 4 to 6, or 5 to 6, it's traveling a much bigger distance, right? Traveling almost the whole distance or the whole length of the box in one frame, right? And then from frame, again, 1 to 2, it's barely moving. Right? So what's happening is when we get right here to this box from frame 9 to 10, that's still a very small distance, right? So remember when we were talking about easing in and easing out, or slow in, slow out in the 12 principles, right? It's that feeling of acceleration and deceleration, or spacing, right? So if I can kind of show you this. This isn't a tool I use very often, but under in the animation window, I am under visualize. I'll say ghost selected, right? And you can kind of see this. You'll see that the distance. It's kind of hard to see that on there. The distance that is traveling each of those frames is bigger in the middle and smaller as it gets here to the end, right? And so that makes it feel like it's decelerating right before it hits the box. Now that's not going to actually. I can go selected. That's not going to feel like it's slamming into it, right? If you were to climb up on a chair and jump off the chair, you can't slow down before you hit the ground, right? And if you did, then it would feel like you glided to the ground, right? What happens is that spacing right before the impact needs to be bigger. Now, if we look at the curve, this makes sense, right? Just thinking about this section of the curve right here. I can highlight that and hit F so we can focus in on this, right? This curve represents the change in that translate Z over time, right? If you take nothing else away from that, that's important, right? It's the change in that value over time. And so we can see that the change from frame 1 to 2, the distance that travels down, is not very much, right? However, as we get here in the middle, 5 to 6, it's a lot bigger. Right? We're traveling almost a whole unit there, right? And that's why we're getting that big spacing. Does that make sense? Okay. Questions? I feel like over that, I could have graphed your attention, or your it feels like the energy just in the room, right? So I don't know if that's because this is boring or that's because I lost you. Which is it?
Which is it? Yes.
It's more like it got boring and then you lost me.
I got boring.
Being totally honest.
No, I know I want you to be, because I need to make sure I'm getting this across. This is really important stuff.
I mean, you got it across.
Okay. Okay.
Like,
You're
but that's the
doing good explaining. I just
think when we
lost
get
the
to the
piece
ball.
of it.
When you get to the ball, Mason.
Yeah, and see the little curves and stuff. What was that?
Cool. So let's look at this really quick. I'm going to make this feel like it's slamming into this wall, right? That's where the graph editor is powerful. So again, Alt right click, I can zoom in and out. Alt Shift right click, I can zoom in and out one axis at a time. And of course, Alt middle click, I can pan around here. So I'm just doing this so I can see it a little bit better. So as we may have seen earlier, I can adjust the keyframe, highlight it, middle click to move it, right? But I can also adjust this bar that goes across here. Anybody know what that's called? This line right here?
the bar.
The bar. Tangent, right? So you're going to hear me refer to tangents quite a bit. So I can, if I drag select the keyframe, I can edit the keyframe, but then after I have it selected and I can see the tangent, if I drag select that little diamond on the end of the tangent there, or triangle, then I can select the tangent, and again, I usually use middle click to move that. I can adjust how that moves in and out, right? Like I could make it travel and have a bigger spacing from 9 to 10. So now look at how big that spacing is on the box, right? The problem with that is now it also continues to travel downward and into the box before popping back up, right? So I can do a lot of adjustments on how this transitions with the tangent. But one of the other things I can do is I can break that tangent. So I could hit a couple of different ways I could do that. Right? I could hit this button right here while I have the key selected, and this will set my tangents to linear. And so now I get this V shape. And so let's watch that first. Let's actually go grab a few of them so you can see, like, 2 of them do that and then a few not do it. So look at the difference in how that impact feels on those. So over here we can see it better. So you see the difference in that? Like those first 2 kind of smack it a little bit, while those other 2 feel like they're kind of easing in and just tapping it, right? So that just happened by setting that to where it doesn't ease in. It doesn't curve in or slowly transition into that keyframe. Now the problem with this is when I set this to linear, what this means is that the tangent from this keyframe is going to be pointing at the next tangent, right? I could go in here and select all of them and click that, and you'll see that that's moving differently now, right? It's hitting on both sides. And what that means is this is linear spacing, right? My box is traveling the same distance on from frame 1 to 2 as it does from frame 5 to 6, right? It's the same change over time. It's constant. It's like a roof, right? There's no curve in your roof. It's a slope. And what that's going to give us a much different looking, but kind of robotic looking timing on that, right? Now, just so we can kind of compare these, I'm going to go ahead and move that box. I'll go ahead and lower those back down to where they kind of line up, so we can look at these for comparison purposes side by side here. So something like that. Now, let's say I wanted it to feel like it was bouncing against the ground. Right? Again, let's translate Z. I can select all of these. I can set them all to linear. And now I kind of get this, like, kind of feels like it's bouncing against the ground, right? Or maybe, let's just, yeah, that's what. But the problem with that is if I wanted to make that even a sharper slope, if I grab this, these 2 tangents are still connected together. Right? So what I want to be able to do is break those tangents. If I grab all of these, so I had that V, or I had this line here that I clicked to set it to linear. If I click this V, it's going to break those tangents. You can see that they get like this little dotted line there, right? And so I can make this more exaggerated, right? If I do something like this, it takes a little bit of time to do this, but a little too much. So now I get this like upside down bell curves, kind of feels like a bowl, right? Watch how that bounce feels now. In fact, if I were to lower this just a little bit, it would feel like it's just kind of bouncing up in the air over and over again. Probably a little too much.
It's not a trampoline.
Huh?
Looks like it's not a trampoline.
Yeah. So we can adjust that. We can do all sorts of stuff to that. Okay, to kind of pull up, well, I'll bring this back here in a minute. So let's play a couple of others here, right? Like we saw, like what happens if we set it all to linear, right? The other thing we can do here is we could do kind of the opposite of that. Let's say I wanted them all to be like ease in a lot and then go really fast through the middle. Right? I can do that as well. Now to do that, I'm going to show you some other things that we do to the tangents. So right now, these tangents are locked and non-weighted, right? So they're locked, meaning they can do this. They're non-weighted, meaning both sides are the same length and I can't stretch them, right? they're always going to be that same length. So if I just highlight all of my keyframes and I go to curves and set that to weighted tangents, you can see it's kind of off screen down there. It's curves and then weighted tangents. Now you'll see my tangents look different, right? Now my tangents have these little boxes on the end instead of those triangles. And if I hold shift, grab that tangent, hold shift and pull out, you'll see I can kind of flatten that out now, right? And so let's just do that across the board here. If I just go through here, hold shift, I grab a whole bunch of these, all the way out through here, hold shift or pull those out. I can get these really flat tops like that. Do that here again. So I've made those a much deeper curve. And now watch the difference on how this one moves. Okay. You've noticed I've clicked a couple of buttons on there, but well, actually, let me sort of stay on that one just for a second. So you'll see what's happening is we're easing out, like from frame 1 to 2, it's barely moving at all, right? And it eases out very slowly, but like from frames 5 to 6, it's a huge distance it's traveling. So we call this the object spacing. What is the space it travels in a single frame? Okay? It's very closely related to timing and slow in, slow out, right? This is the things that we're able to control in the graph editor. Now I'm going to show you, you've seen me like several times going in here and clicking buttons on the top. So let's look at some of these buttons really quick. This first box here will frame everything. So let's say you were zoomed way out here. I click this box, it's going to frame everything. This next one looks like it does kind of the same thing. It frames your keyframe range here, right? And don't worry about this third one. That's just kind of going to center on wherever your curve is there, right? That's one I very rarely use. So this section here, though, all of these next 7 buttons here, these are presets for elements of the tangent, right? So like we saw earlier, if I hit this, it's going to set the tangents all to linear, right? Or if I click this one with an A on it, that's usually the best one to start with. That's the auto tangent. It means Maya's going to make some smart decisions with it. Some of these others are going to be a little harder to see unless I change this so you can see it. So like, I'll undo this here in a second. So for example, this one right here, the horizontal line, if I click that, it's going to set all of my tangents to flat. So that means that tangent is flat. Versus if I click this one right here, it's going to set them all to smooth. So there's just a lot of different things that we can do with these presets. I did want to show you one that is kind of common, which is stepped mode. So if I highlight all of these and click this one that looks like a set of steps right here, so it does something weird. So what we have, if we watch my box up there, is it stays completely unchanged until we get to the next keyframe, and then it snaps. Right. So if I hit play on this, so why might you need something like that?
So like a light or something?
Yeah, animating a light turning on, right?
Or
A what? A camera? Yeah, like, yeah. It's anything that you may need to just switch on or switch off, right? This is actually maybe you wanted to have an immediate color change of something, right? Something goes from red to green. You could just animate that as an immediate change, right? 4 very different looking boxes right now, right? Recognize that they all have the same keyframes on them. All 4 of these are the same exact keyframes. I've only edited the tangent and the way the curve transitions from point A to point B. Right? That's the point of the graph editor. You'll probably remember very early on when we were setting keyframes, I said, learning how to animate, like the basics of it are super easy. It's the S key. You move stuff, you rotate stuff, you hit the S key, right? It gets hard when you're trying to control that animation to do something very specific. And so this is how I can change the personality of that motion, right? I can make it feel like it's snapping or bouncing or popping, right? Whatever it is I want to do, this is where I control that. That's why, and this is the scary part, the graph editor isn't optional. Like the graph editor is something that you will touch on every animation you do for the rest of your life. And that's daunting at first if you're not liking the graph editor. I promise you, you will become friends with the graph editor. Like it's like, have anybody ever had those relationships where you're like, that person's such a jerk, and then like 3 weeks later, you're at the movies with them, and you're like, why did I think you were a jerk? You're cool. This is fun, right? I'm having fun. You want to share a popcorn? That's you and the graph editor. You are going to take the graph editor to the next Avengers movie. It's gonna be wonderful. BFFs, you and the graph editor. Now, really, what happens is it disappears, right? Just like imagine explaining what you do to your grandparents, right? And they'll be like, "So what is all these buttons?" And you're like, "Just don't worry about it." But to you, you already understand. Like I hit W and you move stuff around in 3D space. All that's in your head. It's just a tool, right? And that's all the graph editor will become too. It's just this thing that you can manipulate to have more control over your animation. So I'm going to show you a couple of other interesting things about this. So let's go ahead and do a new scene. I'm going to do something a little faster this time. Let's do a box. Yep, it always starts with the box. And then I'm going to do another box. And I'm going to change that box's pivot point just a little. That's not what I wanted to do. Top view. So if you ever want to change a pivot point, it's either insert or D. D will allow you to do it. So I can hold down D, hold down V, snap my pivot point to there.
Wait, are you saying D as in dog?
D as in dog, V as in Verizon Wireless. I don't know what V stands for. I get terrible cell phone service from Verizon Wireless, so that was the only V I could think of. Okay, so I'm going to do another animation here, right? And this one's going to be much simpler. I'm going to do 2 keys, or maybe I'll do 2 or 3 keys. I'll start up here on frame 1, right? And I'll hit S. And then I want to rotate this back down to where it's flat. Now you'll probably remember that that was 0 on my rotation Y, right? Oh, sorry, let me undo that. I gotta get to another keyframe for that. So let's get a frame like 10 or 11. Then I can set that to 0, right? And set a keyframe on that. And I want it to kind of feel like it bounces just a little bit. So I'll put a little bounce back right there. And there. So what I get from this animation now is this. Okay, let's zoom in on that so we can see the timeline a little better. So, again, I'm only really making changes to one channel. What was it?
The rotate.
Yeah, so it's rotation Y. So you can usually tell where, like, we got a lot of straight lines in here, and we got one curvy line, right? And one of the indicators is color, right? Which curve is that? Y, so green, so X, Y, Z, R, G, B. So Y is green. So I can click on my rotate Y. It'll pull it out there. And then I can kind of zoom in and out a little bit to see stuff. But this makes sense, right? We can say that as the curve goes up, my arm is going to rotate down. We can see that 0 there across that darkest line is where it impacts. It bounces back a little bit, impacts again, bounces back, impacts again. Right? So if I want that impact to be very readable, I just need to break some tangents, right? So this is where like you have to interpret this stuff, right? Rotate Y is the only thing that is changing. There's no translates in this. There's nothing like that. So if I want that to feel like it's smacking, right, I can go in here, select these keyframes. I can break my tangents, and then I can manipulate that tangent to feel like it's really like flying in there and smacking, right? Now I want it to bounce off kind of similarly. Break that. Do it here on this one too. How do you break that one? And again, if I want to get in here and see it a little better, Shift Alt, right click. I can zoom in one axis and get in there a little closer. That way I can break that one too. And so now, just by changing those tangents, I go from this slow, kind of mushy looking animation to that. So this is why this is important, right? That is much more believable of something slamming closed, right? Versus what it was with the auto tangents, which was a good try, right? Maya did its best, but if I go back to the auto tangent version of that, see that feels like it's just not as interesting. Control Z. Let's see if I can undo that now and get my curve back. All right. So this is where animators like are really refining the motion to make it feel believable. All right. Now the graph editor is confusing a lot of times because we are not just dealing with one curve, right? These last two, we've just been dealing with one curve each. So let's create something new here. Let's create a box. Again, show, top view. And I'm just going to do 2 keyframes on this. I'm going to do one where we're here, and then one out here on frame 30. And I'm going to move it up and over. Let's do 10 and negative 10. 10. There we go. So we get this diagonal change, right? So the 2 curves that are changing right now in this are translate Y, translate Z. Right? We can see them both right there. All of these others are unchanged. So you can see what's happening, right? One curve is sort of traveling down to that negative 10. One curve is traveling up to positive 10, right? And it's taking those 2 curves changing at the same time to get a diagonal line, right? So let's think about that. Anybody ever used an Etch-a-Sketch? Who hasn't? Yeah, it's like asking, anybody use this?
Seen those YouTube videos?
Oh, like the amazing
Like the people that are Da Vinci's with Etch-a-Sketch?
Oh yeah, that's been around for years. I remember in elementary school, there would be like in the newspaper, some kid doing this photorealistic, like Abraham Lincoln on the Etch-a-Sketch or something.
Those are the kids that draw with a mouse.
Yeah, and like that's like, how are you doing that? Because how does an Etch-a-Sketch work? You twist one knob, right, and it only goes from side to side. You twist the other knob, and it only goes up and down. So how do you get a diagonal line? You have to twist them both at the same speed, right? So that's what Maya is doing, is twisting both of them at the same speed. Right? And that's how we're able to get a very straight diagonal line, right? Now I'm going to show you an interesting, it's like an analysis tool more than anything. If I select this box and I go to visualize and go create editable motion trail, not edible motion trail, editable. It makes this new little node in here, the motion trail handle right there. And I can delete that, but anytime I want to. But the editable motion trail is a way of seeing the path that our animation is taking, right? And you can see that what we've done is Maya is perfectly twisting both of those Etch-a-Sketch knobs in order to get a perfectly straight diagonal line, right? Now let's look at our curves down here, though. My translate Y is this slow, this ease out at the beginning, this ease out at the end. Translate Z, ease out at the beginning, ease in at the end, right? And in the middle, it goes faster. And so our spacing is doing that too, right? Watch our spacing at the beginning here, really small. Right? Spacing in the middle, much bigger. Right? So watch what happens to this path when I change one of these. If I go to my translate Y here, and instead of having this ease in and out at the beginning, if I set this to linear, watch what happens. Now I'm not getting a straight line anymore, right? In fact, if I set both of those to linear, I get this weird S shape. And that's because one of those channels, it's like you twisted one knob a little faster than the other during a part of that, right? And so that's an interesting way that I can get kind of a complex curve there, right? Without even having to do very much in terms of keyframes. Let's go ahead and set both of those back to auto. And if I went to my translate Z, set those to linear, we get kind of the opposite, right? You'll also see that I have the ability to like really sort of change this around, right? I could do something like this. So that curve doesn't always update perfectly well in real time. And now just with those two keys, I'm getting a little bit of an arc.
How did you get for it to show on the viewport?
You select the box, and then you go to Visualize, Create Editable Motion Trail. This is under the Animation menu. So you're going to be using that quite a bit on the bouncing ball. So, yes?
Why is it that you always break the tangents?
So you don't always break the tangents, but that is a good point. You break the tangents when you want it to feel like, when you don't want Maya to automatically ease in and out on those curves, right? So in terms of those boxes earlier, I broke the tangents when I wanted it to feel like it was encountering another force, right? Generally, I don't move that way. Generally, like I don't hit like these walls whenever I'm moving everywhere, right? So what Maya's trying to do when it automatically sets those curves for you is it's trying to give you what it thinks you want. It thinks you want to ease into this pose. And most of the time it's right, but if you did want it to feel like your hand hit something, then you have to break that tangent, right? So, so yeah, again, like a lot of times, auto tangents are going to be perfectly fine for what you're wanting, right? Okay. So let's do something a little more complicated. Yeah, I know. You're like, what? It gets more complicated? New scene. Don't save. We're going to try this from let's try this from the front view. I'm going to create a donut. I know it's not called a donut, but that's what I'm calling it because I'm fat. True. I mean, like, what did deny? Let's do that. E. J. Okay. So I've done this in the video before. I can't remember. I'm sure I'm going to hit some snags doing this, right? But I'm going to do a quick animation. Frame 1, frame 120. I go out here to the end, hit S. And so we get this really nice animation like this. Right. Maybe I'll pull that back just a little bit on frame 1. Okay. So where the graph editor really comes in handy is being able to make quick changes and have control of those, right? So let's try something kind of complicated here. Let's say my boss came to me and said, wait, that's cool and all, but I really want this to fly over the donut, not under the donut, right? Well, we already know I could go to about halfway here, move that up, and hit S, right? And so now it goes over the donut, right? And if we look at that, that's my translate. Let's sort of frame everything up here where I can see it. It looks like mainly translate y is my up and down, so right? And translate x is my side to side. So this is constantly climbing up because it's constantly moving forward in x, right? And then the y is the up and down axis on my arrow. So as it goes forward, it travels up to here and travels back down to here. Right? So let's say I wanted to, it to be even more complex than that, though. Right? Let's say I wanted it to loop around that donut. Right? Well, then it gets a little more complicated. Let's try a few more keyframes here. Right? Obviously, I want this to stay flat on the ground to about here. Right? So what I could do is go ahead and get this back down to here, move that out to here. It goes up to there. I could go over to here, sort of move this down to here. That's a little bit, right? And hit S again. And so now what I get is this, right? Which isn't exactly what I want, but this is sort of my first pass on it. So I'm going to make sure there's a keyframe on everything. S, I can hit the greater than, less than keys to step to the next one. S, 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 S. Right? So this is where the graph editor is beneficial, is I can make changes to this curve now to make that loop happen. Right? So if I want it to kind of, it gets to here, I want it to kind of travel a little more forward as it's going there. So let's go look at my translate x. My translate x curve is different now, right? So really, I don't want it to, like it goes forward and then hits there, and then it starts traveling backwards. I'm like, I don't really want it to travel backward just yet. I want it to continue to go forward out to here, right? So I could always set more keyframes, but then I'm getting keyframes on everything else. So I'd like to just add a keyframe in here. So I can do that by going to keys and this add key tool. And then I can just select any part of my curve and then middle mouse click to insert a keyframe. I can sort of adjust that curve now. Maybe right there, right? So now I get this going around it. Goes out to here. I want it to continue going back here, so I'm going to go ahead and add another key. I use this so much that I actually end up setting up a shortcut key for it. So add key tool. Again, you have to have the curve selected somehow, and then middle mouse click to change it. Right, like that. And so now we get, so that's a little better, right? Now, here's the interesting thing. Maybe my boss is like, yeah, you missed the point. Like, I wanted it to always feel like it was pointing like in the direction it was traveling, right? I wanted to loop around there. Now it's like an arrow that's like pointing forward for some reason. I'm like, God, I got all these keyframes in there. I have to go back there and rekey everything. But I don't, because all of that is just one channel, right? That is my channels, rotate, and if you're ever in doubt, just change it and see, right? So one of the rotates, it is apparently rotate Z, right? That is controlling that angle of rotation. So I can undo that and just look at rotate Z and realize that what I want is I want this to rotate 360 degrees by the time it gets back to here in this direction, right? So I can just grab these keys, take this up to something like 360. Right? And I'll probably just take this one and sort of transition it through there. And so what I get now is pretty much that. Right? Now I can very faintly like adjust this over time. I can kind of make it feel like it's aiming to it. Sort of the same with the translate Y. I can raise those up a little bit. Right? And so this is why like the graph editor is so nice, is because I can make these changes, right? Now the other thing I'll point out is I can change timing in here as well, right? Let's say I want to make that rotation, like it seems like it's starting to happen a little too early on mine right there. I can pull that down, right? But I could also just make it happen a little later by holding Shift, middle click, and dragging from side to side. Now this is the part that really just messes with people's head. I'm not making the object go more to one side or the other. I'm just changing the point in time in which that data happens. Like that data point happens, right? So now we get like that. Maybe I want that to feel like it's happening a little earlier. Not. And so I can very slowly start to, let me add one more keyframe here because I want that to happen a little faster. Keys, add key tool. Something like that, all right. Now again, all of this is for refinement, but also for quick changes. Because again, what if your boss said, "That's cool, but that donut's too small," or "That donut's in the wrong place. Let's try that. Donut's supposed to be over there," right? And so now you're like, "Well, crap," right? And so like I know like the first thing is like I guess I have to reanimate this whole thing, but you don't, because that's just a change in this location of your translate X, right? It's where this happens. And so I could just grab my entire curve, right, and shift this to about here. I fixed it, right? So the graph editor is extremely powerful, extremely versatile, but it takes you a little while to get used to it, right? And I'm sure, like, I hope this hasn't like sucked the joy out of your day, because I swear this makes animation more fun because you get better results, right? At first, though, it's going to feel a little annoying. You're like, why am I looking at all these stupid curves? I just want to pose my thing and make it do the thing, right? No, like this is where like you will be frustrated later because you're like, why isn't it moving correctly? And the reason is the graph editor. Like we gotta kind of get used to that. So this class today, this week is really just set aside for giving you some time to make friends with the graph editor, right? You're still going to have your differences a little bit, by the end of this class, but that's what the next classes are for, is to get you a little more familiar with it so you feel even more comfortable with it. So what I'd like you to do, let's go ahead and minimize all this. Where's D2L at again? That's unemployment. So what we pretty much just went through was videos 1 through 5. So if you want to, feel free to watch those again. Now that we've kind of gone all the way through this, it may make a little more sense to kind of watch all that over again. But really what I want you to look at is starting with video 6, preparing a scene for animation, and then the bouncing ball 1, bouncing ball 2, bouncing ball 3. You'll see that by the end of this one, what we're getting is, let me get out here somewhere kind of closer to the end. So what we're getting on this is an animation that hopefully looks pretty good. There it goes.
Sometimes the controller is a little distracting.
You wanted to watch it.
Realistic.
There we go. So we're starting to get a little bit of something like that, right? And so this is what your exercise is going to be, is just
Sometimes
just
the
doing this.
controller little
It's a little
distracting.
time
I'll
consuming,
go to show
and rather than
and
again me
uncheck
boring
image
you while
colors,
I
so you
animate
can watch
this,
it without the
I'm
controller.
going to bore you while you're doing your homework, so you can watch the videos then and kind of walk through. The cool thing about that is you literally can just kind of follow
Let's see
along,
the
right?
animation.
You
It's
can
looking a little
you can be
better.
doing the animation, and while you're doing the animation, you can. I just went away. I don't. I was just going to start playing a random BMW movie. Go away. So you can be doing this while you're like listening to the video and then backing up and be like, wait, I didn't get that part. Let me try that again, right? But literally just walking through those 3 or 4 videos, you're going to get something that is what you're needing for the discussion. So what you're going to be doing, I wanted to kind of, instead of walking you through that in class, give you the video to do that, because the discussion post is due on Thursday, and I don't want you feeling like you have to cram it at the beginning of Thursday. You can kind of start that today, tonight, and be working on that and get a refinement on it. So, questions on the graph editor, on the project exercise, anything? I have all the answers.
So let's do like at the
Are
end
they
of
gonna
the
fix
day
the air
on
conditioning?
Thursday?
No,
No.
it's never gonna get fixed.
No.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah,
Talk about that mini fan.
that people have been asking that question since 2001 when they built this building. What were you saying?
So it's due like around the normal time on Thursday.
Yeah, so this is the thing that you'll be posting in your discussion post. If I'm not mistaken, you post it and then get some feedback from people on how to make it better. And so just so you can turn that in by Thursday's discussion post time, that's why I'm like, let's go ahead and start the bouncing ball. Next class period, is the attendance still floating around? Anybody get it, or anybody needing it still yet? Okay. If you haven't got the attendance, we'll grab it. I will be passing around the attendance, but it'll be just open work time. So feel free to, like, if you already got it done, you can come in and sign the attendance sheet and be interrupted. Yes.
What does it mean you need a undo queue that's turned on? Because every time
I don't know how that happens. I think there's a shortcut key to do it, and I don't know what the shortcut key is. I can tell you how to fix it. So if the undo queue, basically your undos stop working. So the way you do that is you go to Windows, Settings and Preferences, and then under Undo, you just have to turn it back on. So it should be set to off. It'll probably be set to off, and there's just an on. You can turn it on infinite. Right now it's set to 50. Turning it on infinite means it starts eating up a little bit more of the resources of the computer. And so if you're working for a long time, it makes Maya a little less stable and
I was
it crashes.
boring and I kept like,
Running out of them.
yeah, and I was getting so frustrated that I
So-
had to start all the way over.
There's a couple other things in here that may be worth thinking about. There is, where's it at? Save actions. Is it this? No. There's an auto save in here, or an auto backup. Where is it?
I don't know. I saw it the other day.
They need to search for that.
Oh, I know it's in here. Is it Files Projects? I bet it's here. Autosave. So under Files Project, there's this autosave option. And what it's going to do is it's just going to create a new folder in your project, and it will save a file every 5 minutes or so. And that way, if Maya crashes, you can always go retrieve that file. It starts getting a little heavy because every time you change the name of the file, like what it's doing is it'll save like 10 iterations of your files and then just start saving over top of them again. But every time you change the name of your file, it starts another 10 files that it will save. So you will end up getting a lot of files on your hard drive, and if you're running low on space, you may want to go clear that folder out every now and then. But that's in there. The other thing is, I mentioned I save a shortcut key for that keys add key tool. If you find yourself doing something a lot and you want a shortcut key for it, that's under Windows, Settings and Preferences, and then there's this hotkey editor.
Ooh, that like on, you know how like the sign that's on.
I think so. I think what that saves is it saves it in your preferences in your documents folder. So I think if you go to another computer, it will save that shortcut key, but I may be wrong on that.
Okay.
It also will not save it if Maya crashes and you don't just close it down. Like if you change that shortcut key, but then Maya crashes, instead of you just hitting the X and closing it, it doesn't save those settings for some reason. So yeah. Yes.
Okay, so this is a bit of an odd question, but when I rotate the ball and I want to squish it the other way, you know what I'm talking about. How do I fix that?
Let's look at the ball real quick. Just look at the rig, just so I can show you how the. So there's a video in there that kind of goes over some of that.
Oh.
But let's look at it anyway. Oh man, did I close that? I closed that. 1 second here, history. So I'm gonna go ahead and download the ball really quick and just show you the way the rig works if you're wanting, or if you have any questions. Again, I was getting some emails about this. You can't open a zip file in Maya. You have to extract this. So after we download it, oh man, where did it go? Show in folder. You have to right click, 7-zip, and then I usually do extract here or extract files. If I do extract files, I think I can uncheck that and hit OK. Yeah. So now you get this ball rigs folder. There's the scene. Where's my file? I'm going to set my project first. So I put it in my documents. Set that. File, open scene. Ball rig. Don't save. So, again, just a quick reminder, because a lot of people are like, where's my texture? 4 is wireframe, 5 is shaded, 6 is going to have the texture on it. You're welcome to change this texture if you wanted to try something different, but this doesn't involve a texture map. This is procedural, so it shouldn't give you too many problems. So you'll notice that I can't actually select the ball. It's because I've put it in a layer called ball no select. You can uncheck that and select the ball. Don't do that. Everything you need should be on this curve. Okay? So you'll see that we have the ability to translate. We have the ability to scale. It's going to make the whole thing bigger, right? And we have the ability to rotate, but look where it rotates from. It's rotating from the ground, right? And that's intentional. Think of this rotate as more of a lean than a rotate. So the other thing you'll notice is my channel box over here, I have my translates, rotates, scales, visibility, but I have 4 more channels that weren't there before, right? These are all custom channels that I've added, including a squash and stretch channel. So I should be able to change that value. If I click the name, middle click out here, I can stretch it or squash it, right? And these RX, RY, RZ, the point of that is like, if I have my ball stretched, right, and I wanted to rotate it to hit at an angle, I can. But if I want my ball to roll, that's going to be one of these, right? So you can see that I can change those values. It's probably RX, yeah. And even in the stretched or squashed position, it's going to seem like the ball is rotating. Does that make sense? And what that's going to allow you to do is let the ball roll regardless of how much you've stretched it or squashed it or warped it around, right? So again, like if you just kind of follow the videos, I'll kind of walk you through a lot of that. So the other thing to recognize, everything that you need to be able to animate is on that one control. You don't need to unlock anything else. You don't need to like dig around into anything. Everything to get this animation done should be right here, right? And so probably what I may next class period, if you all are working, getting stuff done, I may just sort of set up here and kind of work through one myself. But yeah, maybe bring some headphones with you next class period too. Okay, it's 12:45 and it's a freaking sauna in here. So how about we call it? Y'all good with that?
I have to stay here.
You have to stay here.
Can we have one more class after that?
Go hang out in the parking garage and cool down a little bit.
Parking garage is cold.
So, I tried to open Premiere and the Adobe stuff is signed out. So,
I
and then
do not-
in Photoshop, so it's like all of the Adobe cloud is signed out right now.
I do not know how to.
Yeah, I have it for my personal.
Yeah. So do y'all get like free Adobe stuff?
No, not really.
Oh, it's not free.
They said that one day.
Yeah.
I got an email about it, and then I tried. I paid for it already, but I tried to log in. And you said that, and then it was like, no, not really. We should though.
Oh, I know. I don't get it for free either. Yeah, I'm not for sure about that. I know.
Not stretch.
Because I don't do too many classes that teach the Adobe stuff. I'm not really super for sure how to fix that.
Get like a go-to thing and then just
All right.
So I was gonna ask what they say while you're still in here, but you don't see it. So I
Alright, I'm
had
gonna
an idea that I was going to do. I was going to